Hey there. Pardon me for so much time going by without an upload. It's been quite a few months, but we're getting back into the swing of things with Chapter 4, the 2019 convention, United Comes to Power. I want political action that counts. I want a working class that can hold an election every day if they want to. Quote by Big Bill Haywood. Election Eve. United came to the September 20. Goodness. We're off to a great start. United came to the September 14th and 15th convention ready to go and with firm support coming from the 23 locals out of AFGE, AFSCME, APWU, CWA, GMCLC, which stands for the Green Mountain Central Labor Council, IATSE, IBEW, the Ironworkers, LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America, NPMHU, National Postal Mail Handlers Union, OPEIU, UA, United Association of Journeymen and Apprentices of the Plumbing and Pipe Fitting Industry of the United States and Canada, or United Association, UAW, and UFCW. And we had majority support from AFT Local 3203. But even while we entered the convention with a strong and diverse base of support, Reimer had 9 locals lined up behind her, 6 of them being from AFT, and undoubtedly would be working to subvert support away from United if opportunities arose or could be created. Furthermore, up for grabs, as far as we knew, was IBEW Local 2326, 1 delegate and 169 members, representing workers at Consolidated Communications, and Sheet Metal Workers Local 63, 1 delegate and 100 members, along with the smaller OPEIU Local 45, 1 delegate, OPEIU Local 277, 1 delegate, and Professional Aviation Safety Specialists, Chapter NG3, 1 delegate. Another uncommitted was President Jill Charbonneau, who served as the only delegate for NALC Local 521. But Charbonneau had repeatedly told us that she would remain absolutely neutral in the election, so it was thought that her vote was not in play for either side. With all this in place, after months of organizing, United knew that it was unlikely we could win over SMW Local 63, as their single delegate, Bart Wilder, was the incumbent district vice president running against one of ours, Ruben Serrano of AFSCME. But we factored that likelihood into our calculations and expected to lose that vote. We also knew United could afford to lose IBEW Local 2326, but only if everything else broke our way. We had to hold on to all our supporters we entered the convention with, and we needed to carry all the other small, uncommitted locals. It would be tight, and much could change inside 24 hours if we did not play our cards just right, but a victory was in reach, and we came to the convention prepared to do what we had to do to maximize the probability of success. We had red campaign lawn signs out on the roads leading to the Burlington convention site. We had red campaign stickers ready to give out. We had flyers listing our slate alongside a summary of our platform. For each separate table, we also provided the long version of our 10-point program for Union Power. And most importantly, we had organized a record number of delegates to attend, who were largely in support of United. In total, there were 105 delegates registered for the convention. IBEW Local 300 alone turned out 17, which, with perhaps 30 alternates, rank and file members without standing, and allied guests to present. And allied guests also present. Goodness. 55 AFSCME members were there, each and every one supporting United. This was the largest, best attended Vermont State Labor Council annual convention in many decades. Physically outnumbering our opposition by a large margin, our game plan was to have our united delegates vote against any potential goodness, excuse me. Our game plan was to have our united delegates vote against any potential motion to go to a weighted vote. And again, if the opposition made such a motion, they would need to have 20% of the delegates support it for it to prevail. We also anticipated that the sitting president, Charbonneau, out of habit, might seek to go to a weighted vote as a first step, without a motion being made, as that is how voting had incorrectly been done in some elections past. United preempted this possibility by filing a motion with the Elections Committee asking that they uphold the process laid out in our Constitution and not allow for weighted voting unless a motion was made and passed by the requisite number of delegates. To bolster our assertion, we also included a written decision to that effect that we secured from the National AFL-CIO prior to the convention. Furthermore, we gave every delegate at the convention a flyer from United encouraging members to vote against any motion that may call for weighted voting. Here we argued that participatory democracy is superior or more desirable than a weighted representational vote, and further that rank and file participation at conventions should be encouraged, and to achieve that, we should abide by one delegate, one vote. In case AFT on September 14th, and the election was to be held on September 15th, looked around and realized how outnumbered they were and their few allies were, looked around and realized how outnumbered they and their few allies were, and came to understand our strategy. United also filed a motion with the Credentials Committee asking that no additional delegates be seated after the convention was brought to order if their paperwork had not previously been submitted. If accepted by the committee, this would put the kibosh on Reimer and AFT from rapidly making calls and filling out paperwork for the dozens of delegates to show up after the convention had begun, as by United's thinking, they had already had months to organize their members, and if they had not done it by now, they should have to face the consequences. As is tradition in contested elections, President Charbonneau invited Reimer and me to both have one of our supporters appointed to the Elections Committee. Reimer had Snell put on this committee, and I had AFS-CME Local 1343 President Damien Gilbert appointed, effectively making him my top lieutenant for the convention. All told, it was plain from the start that pro-United delegates would massively outnumber Reimer's supporters. And Reimer, almost like she had never read the election rules in the Constitution or otherwise anticipated that we would seek to block any move to go to weighted voting, stuck to her approach whereby very few AFT delegates would attend, but those delegates, with the exception of Local 3203, would be unwavering in their commitment to her. Thus, of the 23 total registered AFT delegates, 13 were from Local 3203, with 11 of those AFT delegates supporting United, one short of United actually having a majority of all AFT delegates. United also appointed Danielle Bombardier from IBEW, our candidate for Secretary-Treasurer, to serve as what amounted to our whip at the convention. Danielle did an outstanding job talking with members about United, making sure members knew who the United candidates were, preparing friendly delegates to oppose any eventual motion to go to weighted voting, and handing out United campaign stickers. The first day of the convention went as expected. After Charbonneau brought the convention to order, AFS-CME members, as they had done in 2018, left to take part in AFS-CME-driven trainings and organizing discussions across the hall. In the main hall, the remaining union members, not from AFS-CME locals, were largely talked at by politicians and their staff, something we would change in 2020. As the day grew old and night unfolded, United candidates and I took every opportunity we could to talk with members, shore up our support, and seek commitment from delegates who had entered the convention undecided. My lieutenant, Gilbert, and Local 1343 Vice President Jesse Greeno also organized a well-attended United happy hour before dinner in their adjoining hotel rooms. By the time the vote approached the following day, United had secured support from OPEIU Local 45, Local 277, and PASS Chapter NG3, thereby bringing the number of pro-United locals up to 26. A road not taken. At one point during the convention, as I fretted over various possible outcomes, I took Damian Gilbert and AFS-CME Local 1674 President Dan Pazer into my confidence. I relayed to them truthfully that I had information about one opposition local president who had previously reached out to me wanting to know if there was a way they could disaffiliate their local from their international and become part of AFS-CME. For a union officer to be heard even whispering about decertifying or inviting a raid is a mortal sin within the AFL-CIO and is not allowed. So the request was unusual to say the least, and after being approached with this request, I rapidly filed a report on the encounter with AFS-CME Council 93 that included the name of the local president in question and some possible non-raiding courses of actions we could engage the international with if we so chose. Not surprisingly, all being AFL-CIO's affiliates, nothing ever came of it. But I still had that report. I told this tale to Gilbert and Pacer and pointed out that if I was to ever make the report available to their international, this president undoubtedly would be removed from their post and the local would likely be put in trusteeship until their next election. The president would be ruined. I told Gilbert and Pacer all this and mused that I could tell this president that I expected them and their local to support United, or this could be their fate. Gilbert, without hesitation, said I should tell this local president that I had the report in hand and I fully expected them to vote the right way. By Damian's reasoning, I did not need to actually make a threat. The threat would be implied and would be enough to achieve our ends. For Gilbert, in this moment, it seemed his thinking was the object is to win, and if it means taking a lower road to get to victory, so be it. Pacer, on the other hand, told me point blank that if I did that, if I used a form of blackmail to prevail, I would be no different than the proverbial old guard that we opposed. He said we had to win or lose on the strength of our platform and our ability to organize, and not through dirty tricks of this nature. Dan's words rang true, and my moment of weakness and doubt passed. I get that real-life political battles sometimes need to go beyond pure principle and employ skillful means in order for the right outcome to be attained. But this approach would be a bridge too far. There was no more talk of walking through such forms of darkness. Fortunate is the aspiring leader who has people of character like Pazer as trusted advisors. The inside game, tactical pressure. In attendance on September 14th and 15th was AFS-CME Council 93 Executive Director Mark Bernard, I don't know why I said it like that, and their political director, Jim Durkin. Both came up from Boston. Throughout the convention, they did everything they could to be supportive of me and the United slate. Bernard expressed to me how crappy it was that Carl LaBounty, as a delegate for the AFS-CME retiree group, had publicly switched sides and was backing Reimer. Bernard was none too pleased with LaBounty since AFS-CME was compelled to open an investigation concerning him and his former treasurer for unaccounted for expenditures while officers in 1343. In fact, just days before the convention, Council 93 had issued a letter to LaBounty and Gauthier demanding immediate action concerning the missing funds and making clear that an investigation was underway. It was also widely known, or should have been expected, that Council 93 would have key leaders at the convention. But as day one drew to a close, so far, LaBounty was a no-show. Following the banquet dinner, after I made the rounds to all the tables and shared some whiskey with a number of members whose support we would need the next day, Council 93 Field Services Director Steve Lyons suggested it would be a good time for me to sequester myself in my hotel room, as the election outcome was still uncertain, and one wrong move encouraged by bourbon could spell trouble for United. With that, Damian Gilbert walked me back to my room. As we were going through the lobby, Reimer and Snell were sitting in chairs adjacent to each other. As we passed, I said to Reimer, "Whatever happens tomorrow, should United win, know that, as far as I am concerned, we are all one labor movement the next day." To that, Reimer replied something to the effect of, and I hope the same holds true for AFSCME after I win. Back in my room, I decided to reach out to Carl LaBounty by phone. Mind you, I knew Carl, and I never believed he had it in him to purposefully misspend union money. Frankly, I believe that the investigation, if anything, would cast aspersions on his former treasurer. This is not to say that LaBounty, as local president, did not bear some responsibility for the acts of his officers. He did. But that is not the same as him putting his hand in the till. I also knew it would be close the next day, and while LaBounty was publicly backing Reimer, I thought he could be brought over once again. The fact that Reimer almost went out of her way to not state her support for him at the AFT debate on the UVM campus struck me as something worth having a conversation about. Here I was, prepared to ask that he place his vote for me, along with other United candidates. But under zero circumstances would I step back from publicly or privately supporting my running mate, Tristan Addy, who would fight off against him for the number 2 spot. But LaBounty did not answer his phone, nor did he return my message. And ultimately, LaBounty would never show up to the convention at all. No one had stopped Carl from coming, and no one had told him not to come. I suspect he did not show up because he knew Council 93 officers from Boston would be there, and that he also sensed that no other AFSCME delegates or leaders had followed him to the Reimer camp. These factors, coupled with the letter from Council 93 just days before, gave him stress and reason to not walk into a union space where confrontation was likely and where he would feel like an outcast among his own union. So by intention or not, Council 93 did United a service regarding the timing of the investigation letter. LaBounty would not be a factor at the convention or in determining the election outcome. Also, while I was alone in my hotel room, the elections committee met. Gilbert was there representing me, and Snell was there representing Reimer. Gilbert asked Vermont AFL-CIO political director Dennis LaBounty to demonstrate how he determined that delegate and voting strength calculations were made, as some locals, such as IBEW 300, believed that they had more members than was factored into their delegate allotment. LaBounty was unable to provide a clear answer. Gilbert then called into question the underlying accuracy and fairness of the vote that would take place in the morning. Snell, Reimer's second, irate at Gilbert's questioning of the process, began to raise her voice, called it bullshit, and soon stormed out of the meeting. This was no more than foreshadowing or a dress rehearsal of what would take place on the 15th. The election and fights from the floor. First thing in the morning, the convention had filled up. Close to 90% of the people in the room, not all being delegates, had red United stickers on their lapels. There was excitement and tension in the air. After President Charbonneau brought the convention to order, we went about considering various resolutions. At one point, a non-AFL-CIO person who was present, Andrew Sullivan from the UE, was recognized and spoke on a matter under consideration. This drew some objections in that this was not a UE event, but an AFL-CIO event. At that point, I raised my hand to be recognized. After being called on, I made a motion to allow non-delegates and guests to speak, but of course they would not have a vote. The motion seemed benign to me, and I made it without giving it much thought. But to my great surprise, after I spoke, President Charbonneau flipped out. Immediately, she went off the rails, yelling at me and the members generally, saying, in essence, that she was sick and tired of so many motions and delegates seeking to alter convention processes and, in doing so, challenge her authority. And when I say she was yelling at everyone, I am in no way exaggerating. Truth be told, President Charbonneau was under a good deal of stress. She and political director Dennis LaBounty were accustomed to running conventions of 20 to 50 people, typically with no contested elections, little ideological divide, and no tactical maneuvering. This convention, which included all such factors, was unlike any they had navigated before, and was significantly larger than any they had previously managed. Further weighing on President Charbonneau was the absence of her top officers, Executive Vice President Carl LaBounty and Secretary-Treasurer Caroline Gauthier, so the weight of the convention fell on her alone. Furthermore, United's motions to various committees the day before, along with the adversarial nature of the Elections Committee meeting the night before, undoubtedly added to her stress. So too did two other United motions brought forth by Omar Fernandez from the floor that compelled the officer elections to allow each candidate to briefly speak before the vote, starting with district vice presidents before moving to executive committee positions, with president going last. After a 5-minute rant aimed at the members generally, Charbonneau, reaching her breaking point, resigned on the spot and left the convention. Such a resignation was unprecedented. Immediately, the ranking officer in the room, member-at-large Traven LaShawn, assumed the role of convention chair, not without first removing his United sticker from his shirt. With LaShawn at the podium, after some commotion, considerations of the resolutions resumed. One resolution advanced by AFT sought to define the Vermont AFL-CIO's political relations and included a direct challenge to United's platform, compelling us to rejoin the Working Vermont Coalition with NEA and VSEA. This resolution was being backed by Reimer and her allies. Thus, passage or non-passage of this clause would serve as a test of United's strength. Knowing this, from the floor I objected to it and again used it as an opportunity to talk about why it was that we had left the coalition to begin with, and why United opposed rejoining until and unless certain changes were made within Working Vermont that were favorable to the AFL-CIO. In response to my concerns, Marty Scanlon of AFGE proposed an amendment that would allow the new executive board to, in essence, set conditions on such a rejoining and to stay out until said conditions were met by NEA and VSEA. Reimer's backers opposed this amendment. Debate ensued. In the end, the amendment was overwhelmingly adopted and the resolution passed. After resolutions, the time came for elections. LaShawn opened by relaying to the members the concerns expressed at the Elections Committee meeting the night before. He stated that since the membership strength of the locals could not be confirmed with documentation the night before, should the election go to weighted voting, if it was close, the final results may not be confirmed until after a more accurate review was conducted concerning voting strength, or after the listed voting strength of the locals was confirmed. He also verified that weighted voting would not be utilized unless a motion to do so came from the floor and, per the Vermont AFL-CIO Constitution, was supported by 20% of the voting delegates. At this, Reimer's second, Deb Snell, became irate, stated to the packed room that she could see what was happening here, and said again that this was all bullshit, or rather, quote, bullshit, and that no results from today would stand, and led a walkout of the great bulk of Reimer delegates, all 14 of them. I could see what was happening too. The facts were that 99 registered delegates were present, 80 of them were committed to United, and Reimer needed 20 delegates to support weighted voting for her sparsely represented AFT locals to have their membership strength be a factor. She simply did not have the numbers to get that done. Further, even if she did, we still had them beat. Given the delegates in the room, we had firm support from 80 delegates representing 3,851 members. Reimer had firm support from 18 delegates representing 3,575 members, including from Bart Wilder of SMW Local 63, who were one of the few locals potentially up for grabs coming into the convention. The only uncommitted delegate present at this point was Sandy Tomaso from IBEW Local 2326, with 169 members. If she would have gone with Reimer, and perhaps she would not have, Reimer would still have failed to reach the 20% threshold to get to weighted voting. She needed 20 delegates, and Tomaso would only bring her to 19. And even if the numbers did somehow get there, even if Reimer got the votes from Local 2326, I would still win in the race for president, overcoming Reimer by a vote of 3,851 to 3,744, a clear united victory by a 100-plus vote margin. As for the other contests, at this point, they were in the bag under nearly all circumstances. For the other executive committee seats, the opposition candidate for executive vice president, LeBounty, was a no-show, thus Addie was a shoo-in, and as a former AFT nurse would likely get votes from core AFT delegates otherwise behind Reimer. The opposition also failed to put forward or campaign for the secretary-treasurer and member-at-large positions. Thus Bombardier and La Bombarde, both IBEW, appeared to face no obstacles. Further, the district vice president positions were each voted on by geography, whereby members must live or work in the county the VP would be elected to represent. And given that Reimer's relative strength centered around Chittenden County, Vermont's most populous and least rural county, and given that the majority of AFT's Chittenden County delegates were United supporters from Local 3203, and finally, factoring in that 2 of the 3 United candidates for these seats, Scott and Alexander, were themselves 3203 members, there was not a reality where they would lose. Therefore, United was on the cusp of a sweeping victory, and there was no way that was unclear to Reimer and her supporters. Plain and simple, we had them beat, and they knew it. At the end of the day, United did the effective organizing needed in the months prior to the convention to put a comprehensive win well within reach, and we further came to the convention prepared to engage on a number of fronts where we could gain a tactical advantage leading up to this moment. On the other side, simply put, Reimer and her allies were never able to find a compelling rationale for their campaign, and by vaguely trying to appeal to progressives while also seeking to retain support from the old guard and the Democratic Party and telling members I was too radical to lead the Vermont AFL-CIO, she played into United's hands, allowing us to delineate the two camps as the relative status quo versus a new left. Further, Reimer and her allies did not grasp the implications of United's maximum participation strategy concerning the weighted vote, or they wrongly assumed we could not reach the level of 80% delegate support. Thus, their minimal participation strategy, whereby they seemingly put all their eggs in the basket of sending a small number of unwavering pro-Reimer delegates to the convention to carry the votes of their members, was inadequate and further decreased any feeling of momentum that could have gone in their favor. And with United clearly being one of the only driving force, and with United clearly being the only driving force resulting in the largest convention in decades, it was easy for us to convert that perception into gaining the support of the three small uncommitted locals during the convention itself. In short, while Reimer, by any objective measure, was and remains an excellent union organizer when it comes to bringing new shops into the labor movement, her organizing specifically geared toward the election was well off the mark. Getting back to the walkout, Snell brought with her a number of AFT delegates who were behind Reimer, 9 in total, the firefighters, 3 delegates, and the 2 Democratic Party staffers who were delegates for USW Local 4. The president, Ray Bettis, was unexpectedly a no-show. Of Reimer's supporters, the 2 AFT Local 3203 delegates that came into the convention backing her remained, as did the delegate from SMW Local 63. Reimer also lingered for some time, but she left before the vote for president could take place. Once the reaction to the walkout dissipated, the convention continued on with elections. United won every race it ran for district VP positions, including United's Ruben Serrano beating incumbent Bart Wilder for Caledonia Lamoille County. By acclamation, we further captured all the executive committee seats. For president, I was nominated by David Fuerzig, a member of AFT Local 3203 and AFSCME Local 2101 President Tom Franzoni seconded my nomination. In the spirit of union democracy, I stood up and nominated my opponent, Heather Reimer. However, at this point, Reimer, on her own volition, had left the convention hall and could not be found to accept the nomination. I therefore withdrew my nomination of Reimer, and facing no other nominations, Delegate Steve May of the National Writers Union, UAW Local 1981, with the second again from Tom Franzoni of Local 1201, moved to make me president by unanimous consent. The motion passed by acclamation. With these sweeping wins, United captured the leadership of the Vermont AFL-CIO and with the Vermont State Labor Council. And with that, the Vermont State Labor Council took a hard left turn. All right. Thanks for checking this out. We'll be back next time with Chapter 5. Appreciate y'all and best wishes as we move forward.